"Marry me instead," lonely millionaire said to the homeless obese maid sleeping outside. A lonely millionaire opens his mansion gates on a freezing night, and instead of turning a homeless maid away, he shocks her with just 4 words, "Marry me instead." At first, it feels like a miracle. A woman forgotten by the world suddenly finds herself inside a palace of warmth and hope. But as whispers spread and old wounds resurface, a buried truth explodes into the open. A son she thought she had lost forever arrives with a secret that could shatter everything. Is this a second chance at love and family, or the beginning of a battle that could destroy them all? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today if you enjoy stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe for more. The bitter December wind whipped through the iron gates of the Holloway estate, cutting through Mariah Jenkins' thin layers of clothing like icy daggers. She huddled deeper into her nest of tattered blankets, trying to make herself as small as possible against the towering wrought iron gates. Her breath came out in visible puffs as she whispered prayers into the darkness. "Dear Lord," she murmured, her chapped lips trembling, "please keep me warm tonight." She pulled her worn blankets tighter, though they did little against the freezing temperature. The estate security lights cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn, making her feel even more invisible than usual. Nobody ever noticed her here, and maybe that was for the best. The rumble of an approaching car made her shrink further into the shadows. Through the gates, she could see the sleek black vehicle's headlights cutting through the darkness. It was probably another wealthy visitor to the Holloway mansion, people who would look right through her as if she were part of the scenery. But tonight was different. The car slowed to a stop, its tires crunching on the snow-dusted gravel. Mariah's heart began to race. Had security finally noticed her? Would they chase her away from her relatively safe spot? The rear door opened, and a tall figure emerged. Even in the dim light, she recognized him immediately, Ethan Holloway himself, still dressed in an elegant tuxedo from what must have been a fancy evening out. Her breath caught in her throat as he approached the gates, his expensive shoes clicking against the frozen ground. "Jenkins?" His deep voice carried a note of disbelief. Mariah Jenkins? She wanted to disappear into the ground. Of all people to find her like this, it had to be him. She watched as he quickly punched in the gate code and pushed through. To her complete surprise, Ethan shrugged off his expensive wool coat and draped it over her shoulders. The warmth of it, still carrying his body heat and a hint of subtle cologne, made her eyes water. "Marry me instead," he whispered, his words so unexpected that Mariah was sure she had misheard. "What?" she croaked, her voice rough from disuse. "Are you mocking me?" "I've never been more serious," Ethan replied, his face solemn in the security lights. "But right now, you need to come inside where it's warm. We can talk there." Mariah stared at him, trying to detect any cruel joke in his expression, but found only genuine concern. Still, her pride made her hesitate. "I don't need charity, Mr. Holloway. This isn't charity," he said firmly, offering his hand. "Please, Mariah. It's freezing out here." After a moment's hesitation, she placed her trembling hand in his. He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed slightly. Together, they walked to the waiting car, where the chauffeur held the door open without a hint of judgment on his face. Minutes later, Mariah found herself standing in the mansion's grand foyer, feeling completely out of place. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, their light reflecting off the polished marble floor. Oil paintings of stern-looking Holloways from generations past seemed to stare down at her disapprovingly. She hugged Ethan's coat tighter around herself, acutely aware of her shabby clothes and unwashed state. Seeing her discomfort, Ethan stepped closer. "Tonight, you're safe here," he said gently, his voice kind and reassuring. Sunlight streamed through heavy velvet curtains, casting a warm glow across Mariah's face. Her eyes fluttered open, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar softness surrounding her. Gone were the harsh concrete and tattered blankets. Instead, she found herself wrapped in silk sheets that felt like clouds against her skin. The guest room's elegant wallpaper and antique furniture seemed to belong to another world entirely. A gentle knock at the door made her start. Ethan Holloway entered, followed by 2 staff members wheeling in a breakfast cart laden with silver dishes. "Good morning, Mariah," he said warmly. "I trust you slept well?" Behind him, the younger maid whispered to the butler, barely concealing her disdain. Can you believe he brought her in? And in Mrs. Holloway's favorite guest room, no less. Hardly appropriate, the butler muttered back, his nose wrinkling slightly as he arranged the breakfast plates. Color flooded Mariah's cheeks, but Ethan silenced the whispers with a sharp look. Once the staff departed, he sat in a chair near her bed. "Don't mind them," he said quietly. "I remember when you worked here yourself, years ago. You were always kind to everyone, even those who didn't deserve it." Mariah's hands trembled as she reached for a cup of steaming coffee. You remember me?" "Of course. You were one of our best maids. Then one day you simply disappeared. I often wondered what happened." Tears welled in her eyes as the memory surfaced. "I lost my job at the diner where I worked nights. Couldn't make rent anymore. The shame of it all," she took a shaky breath. "I couldn't face anyone. Ended up sleeping in my car until it got repossessed. After that, the streets were all I had left." Ethan listened intently, his expression softening with each word. The day passed quietly, with Mariah gradually relaxing in her temporary sanctuary. However, the peace was shattered at dinner time. The dining room doors burst open as Claire Holloway strode in, her 2 teenage children trailing behind her. She stopped dead in her tracks at the sight of Mariah seated at the formal dining table. "Dad, what is this?" Claire's voice dripped with ice. "Have you completely lost your mind? Why is this woman sitting at our family table?" "Claire," Ethan warned. But his daughter wasn't finished. "First the ridiculous charitable donations, and now you're bringing in strays?" Claire's perfectly manicured hands gripped the back of a chair. "This is Mother's house. Or have you forgotten that?" The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mariah stared down at her plate, wishing she could disappear, while Ethan's face hardened with anger. The teenagers shifted uncomfortably, caught in the crossfire of family drama they hadn't expected to walk into. The dining room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the soft clink of silverware against fine china. Claire's cold stare fixed on Maria across the elegant table, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "I suppose the homeless shelter was full tonight?" Claire's voice dripped with disdain. "Or perhaps you found that begging at my father's table is more profitable." Mariah's hands trembled as she set down her fork, her face flushing red with shame. She kept her eyes downcast, focused on the elaborate place setting before her. "And really, Father," Claire continued, gesturing dismissively at Mariah's fuller figure, "surely you could have found someone more presentable to bring to our family table. What will the neighbors think?" "That's enough." Ethan's voice thundered through the room as he slammed his hand on the table, causing the crystal glasses to rattle. His face had turned stern, his usually gentle demeanor replaced by commanding authority. "This is my home, Claire, and Mariah is my guest. You will show her the respect she deserves, or you can leave." Claire's face twisted in anger as she pushed back her chair with a harsh scrape against the hardwood floor. "Oh, I'll leave all right. But don't think this is over, Father. Your judgment has clearly become impaired, and as your daughter, I have a responsibility to protect our family's interests. You'll be hearing from my lawyers." She stormed toward the door but paused when she noticed her children. 15-year-old Emma and 13-year-old Jack hadn't moved from their seats. "Come along, children." But Emma and Jack exchanged curious glances, then looked to their grandfather. "Can we stay a little longer, Mom?" Emma asked softly. "We haven't visited with Grandpa in ages." Claire's nostrils flared, but she didn't argue. "Fine, the driver will pick you up in 2 hours." With that, she swept from the room, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. After a moment, Jack leaned forward, his eyes bright with interest. "Is it true you used to be a cook, Miss Mariah?" Grandpa mentioned it earlier. Mariah's tension began to ease as she nodded, a small smile forming. "Yes, I was. I specialized in comfort food, the kind that warms your soul." "Like what?" Emma chimed in, her earlier reticence melting away. "Well," Mariah's eyes twinkled. "My chicken pot pie once made a grumpy old minister dance a jig right in the church basement." The children giggled, and soon they were pepper her with questions about her cooking, her faith, and even her experiences on the streets. Mariah answered honestly but gently, weaving difficult truths with hope, and even finding moments of humor in her struggles. Later that evening, after helping Emma and Jack settle into guest rooms for the night, Mariah sat on Emma's bed, finishing a story about a kind stranger who had once shared his umbrella with her during a storm. "Sometimes angels wear raincoats," she concluded with a warm smile, tucking the blanket around Emma's shoulders. From the hallway, Ethan paused, listening to the sound of his grandchildren's laughter mixing with Mariah's gentle voice. Something in his chest loosened, a tightness he hadn't even realized was there. For the first time since his wife's passing, the grand old house didn't feel empty and cold. Instead, it rang with the sweet sound of joy and life. The early morning light filtered through the grand kitchen windows as Mariah tied an apron around her waist. Despite protests from the household staff, she insisted on helping prepare breakfast. "Please, let me do something useful," she said softly, rolling up her sleeves. "I may not have much, but I know how to cook." The head cook, Mrs. Peterson, pursed her lips but stepped aside. Mariah moved with quiet purpose, gathering simple ingredients: eggs, milk, flour. Her hands worked with practiced care as she mixed a batch of fluffy pancakes from scratch. The familiar motions brought comfort, memories of happier mornings when she had a kitchen of her own. The staff watched, first with skepticism, then growing interest as wonderful aromas filled the kitchen. When Mariah added a pinch of cinnamon and vanilla to the batter, even Mrs. Peterson leaned in curiously. "My mother's special touch," Mariah explained with a small smile. "Makes everything taste like home." By the time Ethan came down for breakfast, the kitchen staff had begun to thaw. They watched in surprise as Mariah served him a perfect stack of golden pancakes, topped with fresh berries arranged in a heart shape. "This is..." Ethan took a bite and his eyes widened. "This is incredible." Later that morning, Ethan invited Mariah to walk with him through the estate's winter gardens. Frost glittered on bare branches and a few hardy roses still bloomed despite the cold. As they strolled the winding paths, Mariah's composure began to crack. "I had a son," she said suddenly, her voice catching. "Daniel, he'd be 23 now." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I worked so hard to give him everything I could. 3 jobs sometimes. But when I lost our apartment," tears spilled down her cheeks. "The shame was too much. I couldn't let him see me like that. He deserved better." Ethan listened intently, his heart aching at her pain. "You sacrificed everything for him. The last address I had for him was his college dorm," Mariah continued. "But that was 2 years ago. I don't even know if he graduated, where he is now." Her voice broke completely. Without hesitation, Ethan drew her into a gentle embrace. "Your love for him shines through every word," he said softly. "That kind of love leaves a trail. We'll find him." As evening approached, snow began falling in thick, lazy flakes. Mariah sat by a window in the library, watching the white blanket deepen across the grounds. The mansion's doorbell rang, its deep tone echoing through the halls. Moments later, hurried footsteps approached. A young man stood in the doorway, tall, lean, with Mariah's same gentle eyes. His coat was dusted with snow, his expression determined yet uncertain. "Mom?" Daniel's voice cracked with emotion. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Mariah rose shakily to her feet, her heart thundering. "Daniel?" The heavy wooden door creaked open, revealing a young man with determined eyes and windswept dark hair. Mariah's hands flew to her mouth, a strangled sob escaping her throat. "Daniel? Oh, my Daniel!" She rushed forward, tears streaming down her face as she wrapped her arms around her son. Daniel held her tight, his own eyes glistening as he buried his face in her shoulder. "Mom, I've been looking everywhere for you." Ethan stood quietly in the doorway, watching the reunion with a gentle smile. But when Daniel lifted his head and noticed him, the young man's expression hardened. His protective grip on his mother tightened as he assessed the wealthy man before him. "Who's he?" Daniel demanded, his voice carrying an edge of suspicion. "This is Mr. Holloway," Mariah explained softly, wiping her tears. "He's been very kind to me, offering me shelter when I had nowhere else to go." Ethan stepped forward, extending his hand. "Please call me Ethan. You're welcome here, Daniel. Your mother has told me so much about you." Daniel ignored the outstretched hand, his jaw set firmly. "Has she? That's funny, because she's never mentioned you." The tension in the room grew thick as silence stretched between them. Finally, Daniel turned to his mother. "Can we talk? Privately?" Mariah nodded, leading her son to a nearby sitting room. Ethan remained in the foyer, respecting their need for space. But through the partially open door, he could hear their hushed voices growing more intense. "Mom, what are you doing here? In this mansion?" Daniel's voice carried a mix of concern and accusation. "Sweetheart, I told you, Mr. Holloway found me outside his gates. He's helping me get back on my feet." There was a long pause before Daniel spoke again, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Mom, remember what you told me that night when I was 12 and asked about my father?" Mariah's response was too quiet to hear, but Daniel continued, his words clear and deliberate. "You said my father was a wealthy man you used to work for, that he didn't know about me." Another pause. "His name was Ethan Holloway." Ethan's heart stopped as he heard Daniel's next words, barely audible through the door. "Mommy says you're my daddy." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Ethan stumbled backward, gripping the doorframe for support. Mariah appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with fresh tears, hands trembling as she nodded slowly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, confirming the truth she had kept hidden for so many years. "I never meant for you to find out this way." Ethan turned to the window, watching snowflakes dance in the evening air. His reflection stared back at him, a man whose life was about to change forever. The weight of 2 decades of secrets pressed down on his shoulders as the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in silent white. Dawn crept over the mansion, casting long shadows through the frost-covered windows. The usual morning bustle of the household staff felt muted, their footsteps careful and voices hushed. The revelation from the previous night hung heavy in the air like a thick fog. Mariah emerged from her room early, hoping to slip down to the kitchen unnoticed. Her eyes were puffy from a sleepless night, and she clutched her worn sweater tight around herself. As she passed Ethan's study, the door opened, causing her to jump. "Mariah," Ethan said softly. "Please, we need to talk." She shook her head, unable to meet his eyes. I can't right now." Down the hall, Daniel's voice rang out, firm and demanding. "Yes, we do need to talk. All of us." He stood there in borrowed clothes, his guitar case propped against the wall behind him, the only possession he'd brought with him. Ethan straightened his shoulders. "I've arranged for breakfast to be served in my private dining room. Just the 3 of us." The private dining room was smaller than the main one, more intimate with its round table and garden view. Steam rose from coffee cups as they sat in tense silence. The staff had laid out a spread of eggs, toast, and fresh fruit, but no one touched the food. "Tell me everything," Daniel said, his fingers drumming against the table. "The whole truth this time." Mariah's hands trembled as she folded them in her lap. It was 23 years ago. I was working here as a maid. Your wife had passed away the year before. She glanced at Ethan. It wasn't planned. It was brief, but real. I loved your mother, Ethan added quietly. But the timing, everything was complicated. I didn't know about you, Daniel. I wish I had. Daniel's jaw clenched. How can I be sure? How do I know this isn't some kind of scheme? A paternity test, Ethan suggested gently. Not because I doubt it, I can see myself in your face. But for everyone's peace of mind, to remove any uncertainty. Daniel stared out the window for a long moment, watching snowbirds flit between the bare branches. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Fine, I'll do it. After breakfast, the household manager showed Daniel to one of the guest rooms, a spacious chamber with its own sitting area and view of the gardens. He placed his guitar case carefully in the corner, the only familiar object in this strange new space. I'll stay, he told Mariah when she came to check on him. For now. But I'm not calling him Dad or anything. I need time to process all this. In her own room, Mariah knelt beside her bed, hands clasped in prayer. Lord, she whispered, please heal our hearts. Help us find a way through this maze of hurt and secrets. Give us strength to face whatever comes next. Her tears fell silently onto the plush carpet as morning light streamed through the windows. After breakfast, Ethan gestured toward the grand staircase. Would you like to see the house, Daniel? There's quite a bit of history here. Daniel hesitated, glancing at his mother. Mariah gave him an encouraging nod from where she sat in the sunroom. Sure, why not? Daniel said, his voice carefully neutral. They started in the library, a 2-story room lined with leather-bound books and rich mahogany shelves. Ethan ran his hand along a worn desk near the window. This was my father's desk, he explained. I used to sit here doing homework while he worked. Not always the most attentive parent, but he taught me the value of hard work. Daniel's eyes wandered to a collection of black and white photographs on the wall. Is that you? He asked, pointing to a picture of a young boy on a horse. Yes, around 12 years old there. I was terrified of horses, but my father insisted I learn to ride. Ethan chuckled softly. Spent more time in the dirt than on horseback that summer. They moved to Ethan's workshop in the East Wing, where various woodworking projects sat in different stages of completion. This is where I come to think, Ethan said, picking up a half-carved bird. Should have spent more time here when I was younger, instead of at the office. As they walked through the halls, Ethan shared stories of his youth, summer adventures, childhood mishaps, and lessons learned the hard way. He paused at a family portrait from 20 years ago. I was so focused on building the business. I missed too many moments with Claire, he admitted. That's my biggest regret, putting success before family. Daniel's stance softened slightly as they continued the tour. From the window, they could see Mariah in the garden with Ethan's grandchildren. The teenagers were showing her their favorite spots, and her laughter carried across the lawn. They really like her, Daniel said, a hint of pride in his voice. The grandchildren soon discovered Daniel had a gift for telling jokes and could play guitar. They begged him to perform, and soon the sound of music and giggling echoed through the house. Mariah watched from nearby, her heart both soaring and aching as she saw her son potentially finding his place in this family. That evening at dinner, Ethan cleared his throat as the dessert was being served. I've been thinking, he began, looking around the table. Once we receive the DNA results, assuming they confirm what we believe, I'd like to host a proper family celebration. Mariah's eyes grew wide with hope, her hand trembling as she set down her fork. Daniel studied his plate, but the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth betrayed his interest. We could invite Claire and the rest of the family, Ethan continued. Make it official. Welcome you both properly. The winter sun cast long shadows through the mansion's tall windows as Ethan paced the living room. His hands trembled slightly as he held the sealed envelope from the medical lab. A week of waiting had felt like an eternity. "Please, everyone, come in," he called out, his voice wavering despite his attempt to sound confident. Daniel entered first, his face tense but hopeful. Mariah followed, wringing her hands nervously in her oversized sweater. The grandchildren bounced in, sensing the importance of the moment, but still maintaining their youthful energy. "The results are here," Ethan said simply, holding up the envelope. He took a deep breath and carefully tore it open, unfolding the paper inside. His eyes scanned the document, and tears began to well up. "Daniel," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are my son." 100% confirmed. The room erupted in joy. Daniel stood frozen for a moment, then stumbled forward as Ethan opened his arms. They embraced tightly, years of absence and longing dissolving in that single moment. "You're my family," Ethan declared, holding Daniel's shoulders. "My son and my heir. Everything I have is yours." The grandchildren burst into applause, jumping up and down. "We have an uncle," they shouted, running to hug Daniel's legs. Mariah watched the scene unfold, her heart overflowing. The weight of her decades-long secret lifted, and her knees buckled. Ethan noticed and rushed to catch her before she fell, supporting her as she wept tears of relief and gratitude. Later that night, after the celebration had quieted and the children were in bed, Ethan found Mariah in his study. She stood by the window, gazing out at the snow-covered gardens illuminated by moonlight. "Mariah," he said softly, closing the door behind him. "There's something else I need to say." She turned, her face glowing in the warm lamplight. Ethan crossed the room to stand before her. "When I asked you to marry me that first night, you thought it was charity," he began. "But I need you to know the truth. I want to marry you because I love you. I've loved you all these years." Mariah trembled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't deserve you," she whispered, looking down at her worn shoes. Ethan gently lifted her chin with his finger until their eyes met. "You deserve the world," he replied with absolute conviction. The afternoon sun bathed the Holloway mansion's backyard in golden light as the aroma of Mariah's cooking wafted through the air. She had spent hours preparing her famous dishes, sweet potato pie, cornbread, and her special barbecue chicken that made everyone's mouths water. Neighbors and friends mingled on the sprawling lawn, their conversations creating a warm buzz of community. Daniel sat on a wooden stool near the garden, his fingers dancing across guitar strings. The melody he played was soft and soulful, drawing people closer. His music seemed to bridge any remaining gaps between the different worlds represented at the gathering. Children danced freely on the grass while adults swayed to the rhythm, paper plates balanced in their hands. "This chicken is incredible," one neighbor exclaimed, approaching Mariah at the serving table. "You simply must share your secret." Mariah blushed, adjusting her apron. "Love is the secret ingredient," she said softly, her eyes twinkling. Ethan watched the scene with pride, his heart full. He waited for a natural lull in Daniel's music before stepping forward, gently tapping a glass with a spoon. The crowd turned their attention to him. "Friends, neighbors," he began, his voice carrying across the yard. "I have an announcement to make." He gestured for Daniel to join him. "Many of you have wondered about the young man whose music has touched our hearts today. It gives me great joy to introduce him properly. This is Daniel Jenkins, my son." A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd, followed by warm applause. Daniel stood tall beside his father, their resemblance now obvious to all who looked, but Ethan wasn't finished. He turned to where Mariah stood, still in her cooking apron, and walked toward her with purpose. "And there's something else," he said, reaching into his pocket. The crowd grew silent as he dropped to one knee before her. "Mariah Jenkins," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you've brought love and light back into this home. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Mariah's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." The backyard erupted in cheers and applause as Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. Daniel rushed forward to embrace them both, creating a perfect family tableau. But the joy was short-lived. The sound of clicking heels on stone cut through the celebration like a knife. Claire appeared at the top of the garden steps, her face twisted with anger, clutching a thick manila envelope. "I hate to interrupt this touching scene," she announced, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She held up the envelope. "But I've just filed papers contesting Father's estate. This woman," she pointed at Mariah, "has manipulated her way into our family's fortune, and I won't stand for it." The music stopped. The laughter died. Every face turned toward Claire as a heavy silence fell over the once joyous gathering. The morning sun barely peeked through the heavy clouds as Mariah's trembling hands picked up the newspaper. Bold headlines screamed across the front page. "Steel magnate's shocking engagement to homeless maid." Her heart sank as she read further, seeing words like scandal, gold digger, and questionable mental state scattered throughout the article. Ethan sat at the breakfast table, his face lined with worry as he read through a stack of legal documents. "Claire's lawyers filed motions this morning," he said quietly. "They're questioning my mental competency to make decisions about the estate." Throughout the mansion, whispers echoed down hallways. The staff, once warming to Mariah, now avoided eye contact. Mrs. Peterson, the head housekeeper, clutched her cleaning supplies tighter when passing Mariah in the corridor. "Poor Mr. Halloway," she muttered just loud enough to be heard. "Such a shame what's happening to this family." In town, the gossip spread like wildfire. At the local grocery store, people pointed and whispered when Daniel went to buy milk. He heard snippets of conversation. "That's the illegitimate son, and they're after the Halloway fortune." Pressure built until Daniel couldn't contain it anymore. During dinner, he slammed his fork down. "Maybe we should just leave," he shouted at his mother. "Look what we're doing to him. Everyone thinks we're destroying his life." "Son, please," Ethan started, rising from his chair. His face had grown pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead. "No." Daniel's voice cracked with emotion. "You don't understand what it's like to be called a gold digger's son. To have everyone looking at you like you're trash." Ethan tried to step forward, but suddenly swayed. His words slurred, and before anyone could react, his legs gave way. He crumpled to the floor, his head barely missing the corner of the dining table. "Ethan!" Mariah screamed, rushing to his side. Daniel froze, horror replacing anger on his face. The ambulance arrived within minutes, sirens wailing through the quiet neighborhood. Now in the sterile hospital room, Mariah sat beside Ethan's bed, holding his limp hand. Tubes snaked from his arms, and the steady beep of monitors filled the silence. "Dear Lord," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Please protect him. Please don't let this be because of us." She watched his chest rise and fall with each shallow breath. The doctor had mentioned stress-induced collapse, and the words echoed in her mind like an accusation. Looking at Ethan's pale face, peaceful in sleep but marked by exhaustion, Mariah's heart ached. Maybe if she left now, took Daniel and disappeared, Ethan could have his life back. No more scandal, no more legal battles, no more stress wearing him down. She could slip away into the night, just as she had done all those years ago. Her fingers traced the tubes keeping him stable, and she leaned close to his ear. "I love you too much to destroy you," she whispered, her tears falling onto his hospital gown. The steady beep of hospital monitors filled the sterile room as Ethan lay recovering, his complexion gradually regaining its natural color. Mariah sat beside his bed day after day, her large frame hunched over in the too small visitor's chair, watching every rise and fall of his chest. The doctors said he would recover, but the stress had taken its toll. Late one night, when the hospital corridors were quiet except for the soft footsteps of night nurses, Mariah stood in the dim light of Ethan's room. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she watched him sleep peacefully. She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her worn sweater pocket and placed it on his bedside table, her hand trembling. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, barely audible. Then, gathering her few belongings, she slipped out of the room like a shadow, her footsteps silent on the polished floor. The note read simply, "I will not ruin your life further. Forgive me." When Daniel arrived early the next morning to visit his father, he found the note first. His hands shook as he read the words, anger building in his chest like a storm. "No," he muttered, crumpling the paper. "Not again." He spent hours driving around town, checking every shelter and soup kitchen he could find. His mother's pattern of running away when things got tough had shaped his entire childhood. Now, just when they had finally found stability and family, she was doing it again. Late in the afternoon, exhausted and bitter, Daniel passed by St. Michael's, a small brick church on the edge of town. Something made him stop. Through the stained glass windows, he caught a glimpse of a familiar figure kneeling in prayer. Inside, the church was quiet except for muffled sobs. Daniel found his mother in the last pew, her head bowed low. "Lord," she was saying through her tears, "I've carried this guilt for so long. Making my son grow up without a father, running away whenever things got hard, and now bringing all this trouble to Ethan's door. I don't deserve their love. I don't deserve forgiveness." Daniel stood frozen in the aisle, watching his mother pour out her heart. All these years he'd seen her running as weakness, but now he saw the weight she'd carried, the shame, the guilt, the desperate desire to protect those she loved, even if her methods were misguided. His anger melted away as he walked down the aisle. Without a word, he knelt beside her in the pew. Mariah startled at his presence, trying to wipe away her tears. "Mom," Daniel said softly, taking her hand. "We stand together now. No more running." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the driveway as the black town car pulled up to the mansion. Ethan emerged slowly, leaning on Daniel's steady arm. Though his steps were measured and careful, determination blazed in his eyes. Behind them, Mariah hesitated at the car door, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Come on, Mom," Daniel said firmly, extending his free hand. "We're doing this together. No more running." Mariah's eyes welled with tears as she took her son's offered hand. The three of them made their way up the grand steps, forming a chain of support and unity. The house staff waited at attention, their faces showing genuine relief at their employer's return. Inside the familiar warmth of his home, Ethan straightened his shoulders despite his weakness. "Martha," he addressed the housekeeper, "please bring tea to my study." For three. In the wood-paneled study, Ethan settled into his leather chair with a slight wince. Mariah perched uncertainly on the edge of another seat, but Daniel's gentle hand on her shoulder encouraged her to lean back. "Mariah," Ethan said softly, his voice still carrying authority despite its weakness. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his and found no accusation there, only warmth. "I never doubted you," he continued. "Not for a moment. You tried to protect me, but we're stronger together." Sunlight suddenly broke through the heavy curtains, painting golden stripes across the carpet. Ethan reached for Mariah's hand. "Shall we pray?" Their fingers intertwined as they bowed their heads. Daniel watched, moved, as his parents prayed together, their whispered words filling the study with hope and determination. Later that evening, the family gathered in the library. Legal papers covered the massive oak table as they prepared for the upcoming court battle. Daniel had already contacted several character witnesses, people whose lives Mariah had touched during her years on the streets, who were eager to testify about her kindness and integrity. "Claire won't know what hit her," Daniel said, organizing another stack of documents. "We've got truth on our side." Mariah's hand rested on Ethan's shoulder as she studied the papers that would determine their future. For once, she didn't shrink from the challenge. Her voice was steady as she said, "We'll face this together. As a family, The setting sun painted the library in shades of amber and gold, illuminating three people who had found their way to each other against all odds. They were ready to fight for their bond, their love, and their future. The courthouse buzzed with tension as people packed the benches. Reporters clutching notepads and smartphones lined the walls. Camera flashes burst like lightning through the windows. Mariah sat beside Ethan at the defendant's table, her hands trembling slightly as Claire's high-powered attorney approached the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," the lawyer began, his voice dripping with rehearsed concern, "what we have here is a calculated scheme. Ms. Jenkins, a former maid, homeless for years, suddenly appears at Mr. Holloway's gates on a cold winter night. How convenient." He held up a stack of papers. "Bank records show Mr. Holloway has already transferred significant sums to her account. Is this love or opportunism?" Reporters scribbled frantically while photographers jostled for better angles. Claire sat in the front row, her face a mask of righteous indignation. The lawyer continued painting Mariah as a manipulative gold digger who had preyed on a vulnerable widower, but then the tide began to turn. Mrs. Peterson, who ran the local bakery, took the stand first. "I've seen Ms. Jenkins give her last dollar to hungry children outside my shop, even when she had nothing herself," she testified, her voice thick with emotion. "She would pray with anyone who was hurting, rich or poor." Claire's face tightened as more townspeople came forward. The florist described how Maria had tended his wife during her final days of cancer, expecting nothing in return. The librarian spoke of Mariah's quiet dignity even during her hardest times. Then came Claire's own children. Her daughter Sarah, 16, stood tall despite her mother's glare. "Grandma Maria taught me to bake cookies," she said, using the term of endearment naturally. "But more importantly, she taught me to be kind to everyone. She makes our whole family better." Daniel's testimony struck the deepest chord. "My mother raised me alone, in poverty, never telling me who my father was to protect his reputation," he said, looking directly at Claire. "She chose hardship over scandal." Does that sound like someone after money? As witness after witness spoke of Mariah's gentleness and faith, tears began flowing in the jury box. Even the court reporter dabbed at her eyes. Claire's bitter campaign against her father's happiness became increasingly clear to everyone present. The judge, a distinguished woman with silver hair, listened to the final arguments with careful attention. When she spoke, her voice carried authority and warmth. "This court finds no evidence of manipulation or mental incompetence. Mr. Holloway is fully capable of making his own decisions, and Ms. Jenkins has demonstrated exemplary character through countless testimonies. This case is dismissed." Mariah's legs gave way as relief flooded through her. Ethan caught her hand, steadying her as he had done so many times before. His touch conveyed all the love and support she had never dared to dream of. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the small chapel's wooden pews. White lily adorned every corner, their sweet fragrance filling the intimate space. The modest country church seemed transformed into something magical, yet warmly familiar. Mariah stood in the tiny back room, smoothing her simple ivory dress. It was elegant but understated, much like her, a flowing A-line gown with delicate lace sleeves. Her gray-streaked hair was styled simply, adorned with a small pearl clip that Sarah had insisted she wear. Daniel appeared at the door, looking handsome in his dark suit. His eyes grew misty as he took in the sight of his mother. "You look beautiful, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He extended his arm to her, ready to walk her down the aisle. At the front of the chapel, Ethan waited in his perfectly tailored gray suit, his face radiating joy. Claire's children, Sarah and Tommy, stood ready with baskets of rose petals. As the music began, they started down the aisle, scattering pink and white petals in their wake. When Mariah appeared on Daniel's arm, a collective murmur of appreciation rippled through the gathered guests. Tears glistened in Ethan's eyes as he watched her approach. Each step brought them closer to their new beginning. The vows they exchanged were deeply personal, speaking of redemption, second chances, and grateful hearts. Ethan's voice wavered as he promised to cherish her for all their remaining days. Mariah's words, though soft, carried clearly through the chapel as she pledged her love and faithfulness. Just before the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan leaned close to Mariah, smiling through his tears, and whispered tenderly, "Marry me instead," echoing those first words that had changed their lives on that cold winter night. Their kiss was met with joyful applause that filled the small chapel, celebrating not just a wedding, but the triumph of love over all obstacles. The grand dining room of the Holloway mansion buzzed with warmth and joy. The long mahogany table stretched from end to end, laden with steaming dishes that Mariah had lovingly prepared. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier's soft glow, and the aroma of freshly baked bread and roasted herbs filled the air. Ethan sat at the head of the table, his face relaxed and happy, with Mariah beside him. Daniel chatted animatedly with his new nieces, Claire's children, who had grown surprisingly close to their uncle, despite their mother's objections. Neighbors and friends filled the remaining seats, their laughter and conversation creating a symphony of contentment. As Mariah passed a basket of warm rolls, she paused, overwhelmed by the moment. Her mind drifted back to that bitter December night when she had huddled against the mansion's gates, wrapped in threadbare blankets, praying for shelter. The contrast between then and now brought tears to her eyes. She glanced around at the faces of her new family, faces that once looked at her with judgment, now beaming with acceptance and love. Silently, she offered up a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered in her heart, "for this beautiful redemption, for turning my shame into joy, my loneliness into family." The clinking of a glass drew everyone's attention. Ethan stood, his eyes twinkling as he surveyed the gathered faces. He raised his crystal goblet high, his voice strong and clear. "To family flawed but whole." The words resonated through the room as everyone lifted their glasses in response. The crystal clinked musically as toasts were exchanged, faces glowing with genuine happiness. The mansion, once cold and formal, now radiated with the warmth of true love and belonging. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.